Hello everyone and welcome back. So in today's lecture, we'll be going through some programming basics in Python. Today's lecture will be our series 1. Okay, so in today's lecture, we'll be firstly going through some language semantics of Python. In this particular part, we're going through some basic communication rules of Python, such as we need to use some indentation and not braces versus, extra that. And then next, we're going through some binary operators and comparisons. The second part will be our today's focus, as this part will give you guys some basic understanding or some shallow taste of how logic expressions are used in Python and how to use them correctly. And then our final part for today's lecture will be scalar types. We'll be going through some basic data types of Python, and then in the later lectures, we'll be going through some more complex or complicated data structures. Okay, without further ado, let's begin. Well, so first, in order to communicate effectively in the world of Python, we need to understand some basic rules of how the speaking of the language. Okay, so let's jump back to our Jupyter Notebook. As we can see, here's our Jupyter Notebook, and then we'll be going through the first part, which is our language semantics. Well, so Python, as we all know, is well known for its readability, simplicity, and explicitness. And these three characteristics of Python give it a really, really user-friendly languages to whether you are a new starter in the programming world or you're an advanced programmer switching from C or C++ and then searching for some more easy code that's communicate. All right, so first, our rule number 1 is to use indentation, not braces. Well, so first of all, we have to remember that Python uses the white space. You can use it as tabs or spaces to structure the code. And instead of that, I don't know whether you guys have some previous experiences in C or C++, and these old school style languages tend to use braces, as a coding block, but that's not the case in Python. So Python here uses the white space. So as we all know, here's some example of coding blocks. You guys can just leave it alone, what does it actually do? But I just want you guys to focus on here. So here are some white spaces, and then here are also some white spaces. And these indentations indicate different building blocks. So here means that these, this line of code belongs to block 1, and the line of code belongs to block 2, while here, since this building blocks 1, 2, 3, 4, these 4 lines here has the same indentation, so these 4 lines form block 3. All right, so as we all notice that, so here's is a column, and then so a column denotes the start of an indented code block. And after the column, the code must be indented by the same amount until the end of the block. So once again, this column indicates the start of a new block, and it has the same indentation. So these guys forms block 1, and then same rules goes here. These guys form block 2, and then these guys form block 3. All right. And then another thing to mention is that significant white space is a fact of life for Python. We strongly recommend you guys using 4 spaces as our default indentation and replacing tabs with 4 spaces. All right, so here's 4 spaces, and then here's 4, here's another 4. So this side here has 8 white spaces. Okay, to summarize a little bit, we use indentation or white spaces to indicate each coding block. All right, let's jump back to the next rule. So the next rule is we are able to be able to have the multiple statements in one line, and we're going to separate them by the semicolons. So as you can see by now, the Python statement does not need to be terminated by semicolons. Okay, so this guy here doesn't have any semicolons to end it. Semicolon can be used to separate multiple statements in a single line. Okay, so these guys here are multiple statements. We can separate them into 3 lines, but for some reason you want to keep it in a single line, and in this case we can use the semicolons. So putting multiple statements in one line is generally discouraged in Python, as we mentioned, as it often makes code less readable. But if you guys do want, for some reason, to save space, or these guys just belongs to the same, assignment style, you can use multiple statements in one line, but you need to separate them with the semicolon. Okay. The next rule is everything in Python is an object. So another very, very important characteristic of the Python is the consistency of its object model. So every number, string, data structure, function, or class, a module, and so on and so forth. So these guys here, you guys don't necessarily have to worry about it too much. These we're going to talk about later. So these are the different data forms of Python languages. Okay, so all of them, everything exists in Python interpreter has its own box, which is to refer as a Python object. Then each object has an associated type. For example, it can be a string or a function. So a string is a scalar type, which we'll go through later in today's lecture. And then a function is another, some very useful, member of this Python family. And we'll go talking about it later. So each object in Python has an associated type and its internal data. So this internal data means what's the value of it. Say, for example, if it's a number, it should be number 5, something like that. And in practice, this makes the language very flexible, as even functions can be treated like any other objects, they're the same. So to sum up, just remember everything. So everything you mentioned or everything you meet in Python is an object. All right. So our fourth rule is how do we write comments? So comments is the text you put in the code for others as well as for yourself to understand what this kind of code is doing. All right. So any text preceded by the hash mark or the pound sign here is ignored by the Python interpreter. And this is often used to add comments to the code. So at times, you may also want to exclude certain blocks of code without deleting them. And these gives our second scenario of how to use or why to use the comments. So in this case, our easy solution is to comment out the code. We have a very nice example down there. So as we can see, these 3 lines followed by the hash mark or the pound sign are comments. So these guys are ignored by the Python interpreter. And comments can also occur after a line of executable code. So while some programmers prefer comments to be placed in line preceding a particular line of the code, as you can see the example here, preceding, for comments following the line of code can sometimes be very useful. Say, for example, this guy here follows this line of code, and this just explains what this line of code is about. All right, to sum up our basically 4 rules in Python. First rule is always to use the indentation. Second rule is how we use statements in one line, though it is discouraged, but if you have to use it, you can use the semicolon. And the third one is the everything you met in Python is an object. And then the fourth one is how to write comments. We can write comments preceding the building blocks. We can write the comments following by any specific kind of code.